What if you could invest in the next Nvidia before it skyrockets while avoiding the stocks that crash and burn? In this video, I'm revealing a stepped framework to find, evaluate and invest in the semiconductor stocks, the likes of AMD, Nvidia, Micron, so you can build a portfolio that thrives for many years. Semiconductors are the backbone of AI, gaming and tech. And this industry could hit $1 trillion market by 2030. And knowing how to pick the winners isn't just smart, it's essentially your ticket to massive gains. In my opinion, the chip industry breaks down into 4 key areas: design, manufacturing, equipment, and diversified players. I've handpicked 15 or so candidates for you, grouped by their role, with a bit of history and their biggest rivals to show you who's who in this trillion-dollar space. Before we start to dissect this list, I do believe that semiconductor space is the essence of technological development. It's the state of the art and it's orders of magnitude more difficult than anything you can imagine, be it genetics or be it the likes of SpaceX or rocket technologies. This is by far the most difficult field of science, in my opinion. This also leads to a point where no matter if you're the leader in a market segment, be it in design or manufacturing, if you're complacent and you don't put the money in the R&D, no matter how dominant of a position you have, you're always one single development, one single patent, one single company, small startup that can essentially disrupt your entire business, even if it's in the hundreds or even trillions. And this has happened time and time again. The latest one was Intel, 2015, 10 years ago. They were the market leader in design and manufacturing. The only threat they had in the CPU space was AMD, a small company absolutely on the verge of bankruptcy. And yet they managed to lose that leadership due to the small advantage that AMD had in manufacturing, called the chiplet strategy. Intel used to make monolithic chips, whereas AMD decided to make smaller chips and connect them together, essentially, literally like gluing them together, to the point where Intel was laughing AMD on presentations, official presentations, where on the keynote, Intel was joking about a small company named AMD gluing together chips, but whereas at Intel, we give you the real chip, no glue needed. That was essentially the complacency and how AMD from the reverse mirror started to just eating into Intel's market share from left and right and center. And today, 10 years later, AMD is the undisputed market leader in the CPU market. Now, we might potentially see another revival of Intel. There's some rumors about the manufacturing leg of the company really starting to be competitive. Difficult to say yet. TSMC is for sure the undisputed leader at the current stage, but there might be some clouds on the horizon for TSMC as well. What are these companies that, in my opinion, are the best opportunity? In the design phase, when it comes to the likes of Nvidia, AMD, or Marvell, I think there are 2 dynamics. The first one is the dynamic of Nvidia and AMD. Nvidia being the market leader in the GPU space, and a company that is solely focused on GPUs, more or less. Essentially, 95% of their revenue is from GPUs, hence I call them a GPU company. Now, you could call them an AI GPU or AI data center, but it's based on GPUs. Whereas AMD is a bit more diversified. They are really exposed to GPUs as well, both in gaming and AI, the same as Nvidia, but they're also competing against Intel in the CPU space. They're also competing against Intel in the field programmable gate arrays, FPGAs, since the purchase of Xilinx back in 2021. So AMD is a lot more diversified, and even if they don't manage to do that well in AI, this company is for sure gonna survive. At least they might not thrive, but they will survive. So I think the risk to AMD is not that much, whereas Nvidia is really counting on dominating the AI GPU space, despite the threat not only being from AMD, but as well from the hyperscalers like the likes of Meta, the likes of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, because those companies are also making their own purpose-built AI GPU hardware. So Nvidia's market is going to be attacked from every single direction. And that is the risk with Nvidia. Although the valuation on pure fundamentals, for example, forward price earnings ratio is not that high. It's currently around 25, 26. But that was the one dynamic, AMD and Nvidia, right? The other dynamic is ARM. ARM is playing on the fact that they are working on an instruction set called ARM instruction set that is different than the traditional x86, which is what Intel and AMD has been doing over the past 20, 30, 40 years. And ARM goes hand in hand with the development on the mobile computers, like your smartphones, your iPads, your other tablets, your smartwatches, everything that is smart related is essentially running on ARM. Your Apple iPhone or your Samsung Galaxy Ultra. ARM is playing essentially on smart portable mobile computers, being a smartphone or a laptop or whatever that is. That is their niche, and that is a niche that just naturally keeps growing, and that is a threat to AMD and Intel's x86 general purpose CPUs. Moving to manufacturing, it's all about TSMC and Intel. I didn't even put Samsung on this list, but although they are there, but it's mostly about Intel and TSMC. Intel being historically the leader, although losing their place as number one in the past 10 years due to complacency and due to also not utilizing some tools, for example, the EUV machines from ASML, which is also on this list and probably the safest bet, that we will talk about ASML later. But yeah, so in this scenario here, Intel is, as I mentioned before, as you can see on my list, this company is with the by far highest ceiling. Why do I say that? Well, Intel is the only company on that list that is both in the design and manufacturing side. So what is the biggest manufacturing company on the planet when it comes to the semiconductors? It's TSMC with a market cap close to $1 trillion. And what is the biggest design company? That's Nvidia with a market cap 2.7 to 3 trillion, combined of 3.5 to 4 trillion US dollar. Is Intel gonna take all of that money, all of that market cap if they manage to execute well on design and manufacturing? No. Is Intel gonna take a huge chunk of that market? For sure. Why do I say that? Well, the semiconductor space is not the automotive market, right? You don't have like 10, 20, 30 big companies fighting it out. In manufacturing side, you have Intel and you have TSMC, to some degree Samsung. That's about it. And the leader is gonna get a lot of market share. Currently the leader is TSMC and they're dominating, whereas historically it's been Intel and they used to be dominating. But if we are on the verge of a kind of Intel resurgence again, given the low market capitalization of Intel right now, I know they have high amount of debt, they have huge amount of problems, the CEO just changed again, there's a lot of problem, but I'm talking a perfect scenario where they turn this ship around, then this company for sure is at least a couple of trillion US dollar, which is more than 20x from here. And I'm saying that like in 5 to 7 years. So that's why I'm saying Intel is a risky bet, but it's also by far the best potential reward. The second best, in my opinion, in terms of reward is AMD. They're also not that risky. That is why I think out of all these companies, the best one for sure, in my opinion, is AMD without any shadow of a doubt. They are diversified, they have multiple exposures to CPUs, to GPUs, to FPGAs, to gaming, to consumer goods, whereas Nvidia is so razor sharp focused on AI and they are so dominant in the market, whereas AMD is not necessarily having even like, I mean their best market is probably the gaming CPUs on the consumer side and the server CPUs on the data center side. And they're having like maybe 20-30% market share, so they still could take a lot of market share in those areas. And in the AI GPU, they're essentially only having 5 to 10% market share. And technically, in terms of pure hardware design, I would put AMD against any of these companies any day of the week. That means that if they only get their act together in the software space, they could be a real threat to Nvidia. And reading of what happened recently, I do think that they are taking their software issues very seriously. You then have obviously ARM. I think ARM is an interesting one. It's very expensive in terms of fundamentals, price to earnings ratio. But again, the market is naturally shifting to more mobile units instead of like stationary units. And in that shift from stationary to mobile, people are going from x86, the old one, to the ARM instruction set. And ARM is getting licensing fees from the companies like Qualcomm on this list, from companies like MediaTek. Even AMD is exploring some ideas with the ARM kind of instruction set. We know that Nvidia's Nintendo Switch is based on ARM. They're also doing some ARM CPUs for the data centers. So there's companies like Marvell. Marvell is attacking both Intel and AMD, mostly on the general purpose CPU side, but not the way AMD does it, but instead what they are doing, they are going with ARM. AMD and Intel is usually now doing the x86 traditional one, whereas Marvell is looking at it with a new kind of eyes. But again, I do think that AMD is lean enough to prepare for that kind of threat. If Lisa Su sees that the market is moving towards general purpose CPUs with ARM, I don't think AMD has any issues whatsoever to quickly move over. Then you have the likes of Micron. Micron is similar play as AMD on the memory side instead of the design side. Micron is not the leader currently, but they are very close to the leadership. They're not far behind, and they have very low market share. So that alone, that dynamic and the low valuation, in fundamentals, what are the price to sales ratio less than 3 and the price to earnings is around 6. So Micron is also a really good one here. And then obviously the safest bet in terms of maybe not the best potential, but for sure by far the safest bet is ASML. They don't have, simply put, any competitors out there. The only real competition potentially comes from China maybe in 5, 10, 15 years. So currently ASML is a monopoly. And for that reason, it's quite strange to see that ASML and Nvidia have currently the same kind of PE ratios. I would much rather look at ASML at this current valuation, although Nvidia is not expensive. But again, the risk to Nvidia is that they face threats from the likes of Intel, the likes of AMD on AI GPUs. They're also facing threat from Google, Microsoft, Meta, and Amazon. These are not small companies. These are one of the largest companies on the planet, top 5 or top 10. And all of them are capable of doing their own chips. So why would they pay Nvidia 80% markup when they can make their own chips, right? And this is what's happening in the long run. That's also a threat to AMD. But because AMD is so diversified, I think they are less at risk than Nvidia. And again, look at the market cap difference. Nvidia is 15 times the market cap of AMD. So they are in a much more severe position if the market moves away from Nvidia-made GPUs, which it seems to do slowly. But will Nvidia innovate on the software side maybe? That's a big question, to be honest. So summarizing all of this, I think, again, look at the companies with fair valuations. Look at the companies that are potentially growing into a large market. Again, ARM growing into the x86 market, Marvell riding on the ARM wave against Nvidia, AMD and Intel, AMD in then turn trying to get a piece of Nvidia's lucrative market. Maybe that's one dynamic that you are looking at. TSMC hoping that Intel won't make it, and if that happens, TSMC will be a monopoly like ASML, and all of a sudden TSMC would look very cheap. Or maybe it's the reverse, that Intel for sure with their 18A and 14A process are really the real deal now and are gonna threat in that scenario TSMC who has been increasing their margins left, right and center and doing essentially price hikes every single day almost over the past couple of years. So there's a lot of dynamics there. Which one you pick is up to you, but I would say the safest dynamic here is ASML. If TSMC wins, they need ASML's EUV machines and second generation high NA EUV machines that cost 3, 4, 5, 600 millions a pop. They are the size of a 3-story building, and once they even install it after months of installation time, they will start to get service money because this machine needs to be serviced all day, every day. These are again, machines for $500 million almost. Intel needs them if they manage to bypass, if they manage to go ahead of TSMC. And TSMC needs them to push away Intel. Samsung needs them. And on the design side, no matter where you look at it, AMD, Nvidia, Marvell, every single chip from now on that is on the state-of-the-art manufacturing node will need a ASML EUV machine behind it. That's just how it is. Unless there is a magic trick out of China from left rear view mirror, then maybe that would reconsider the ASML valuation. But currently, even with tariffs, what are tariffs gonna do? ASML is so safe because every single company on this planet needs them. This is the most important company on the planet right now. And I would say that is the safest bet. And the price to earnings ratio of 25, I find it quite fair, to be honest. So again, depends on which kind of story you are looking at. But now I gave you at least the first insight to what I view is the semiconductor space. And starting from this week, I will start to do a deep dive on each of these companies. And please comment in the comment section which ones you'd like me to look at first. So please, thank you for your time, like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.